Society should not dictate in any way how you live your life. Society shouldn't dictate how you interpret the Bible. Society shouldn't determine what you believe and what you should not believe, especially when we are Christians. Of course, let's be sincere here. We live in different societies, and these societies have a lot of influence in our lives. However, when we become Christians, we've got to put an end to that. Even though there is an influence that comes from society, it is not society that determines what is good and what is bad. It is not society that sets the standard of how we interpret and live life on earth as Christians. There is a theology out there that tends to give more value to traditions and societal norms than what the Bible says. It is true that when we read the Bible, in order to come up with a good interpretation of its content, we've got to reflect, we've got to consider all the linguistic aspects, all the ancient traditions, and the culture of the time in which the Bible was written. Nevertheless, we must never forget that the Bible is also written for us, and it is applicable in our times. In other words, just because we understand why the speaker spoke what he said to those ancient people to whom he was talking at that particular time, does not mean that the speaker is not talking to us as well. Of course, we need to distinguish between things that were spoken in the light of the Old Testament from those that are spoken in the light of the New Testament. And also, just because we have to study to come up with a correct interpretation of the scriptures, which is, by the way, commended, does not mean that we have to throw away the Bible protocols and hang on to Christian traditions and societal norms to dictate the way we interpret life. Just because we live in times when people tend to think that we live in modern ages and so they can accept traditions such as homosexuality, does not mean that genuine Christians should follow them in that direction. Just because divorce is readily accepted in almost every milieu today, including Christian communities, does not mean that we have to accept the practice as a good biblical norm. And just because Jesus Christ has followers in all Bible-believing denominations does not mean that he wants us to continue in our segregations, divisions, and conflicting theological ideologies. In a nutshell, we want to do a good interpretation of the scriptures and stand by the truth, come what may, regardless of what society thinks, because society should not dictate the way we interpret life. Human traditions should not determine how we discover truth. Human traditions should not take away the place of empirical spiritual evidences. There are so many things happening in all societies at the moment, and most of these things have crept into the church. And it is our duty to make sure that we guard our hearts so we are not contaminated. It is my prayer that you will not let societal ideologies dictate how you interpret life. God bless you.